You're welcome back, and thanks for joining us. It is still Nigeria's economy today from Super Screen Television. Some school of thought are of the opinion that Nigeria's economy should have gone into recession by now. Some are saying that we are already in recession, judging by happenings around us in the economy. What is keeping the economy going? What are the economic indicators in this quarter three? Joining me in the studio to analyze the state of the economy in Nigeria in quarter three is a business journalist, Obinna Chima. Chima, you are welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Tunde, Dr. Tunde, for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you to Super Screen for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for finding time to join us on the program.
Thank you.
Now, Chima, how would you describe the state of the economy, especially as the pandemic rages on?
I think the best way to look at it is for us to look at what happened in the second half of this year. Okay. Because we are barely into the third quarter. We've just done about 40 days in the third quarter.
Sure.
So the best way to look at it is to look at what happened in the second half of the year compared to what happened in the second half of 2019. And we'll look at some of the economic indicators. Inflation as at June 2019, which was the second half of 2019, was at about 11.2%. But as at the second half of this year, it's climbed to about 12.5%, with about 130 basis points. The purchasing managers index, which is used to measure the health of the manufacturing sector, was at 57 basis points as at June last year. As at June this year, it was about 44.1 basis points, but it climbed to 44.1 basis points as at July this year. The exchange rate as at June last year was about 360. We've seen some adjustments. It's now about 380. The market capitalization of the Nigerian Stock Exchange as at June 2019, it was around 13.6 trillion. As at June this year, it's been hovering around 12.9 trillion naira, and even as of yesterday, it closed around 12.9 trillion. Nigeria's GDP, as at the second half of 2019, was grew by 1.95%. But we are yet to see the second half figures, which hopefully by August 20th should be out. But as at the first quarter of 2020, the GDP grew surprisingly by 1.87%, when a lot of people thought the economy would have gone into recession, considering what has happened. So I will later talk about some of the major factors that drove some of those indices. But if you look at second half of 2019, President Buhari was inaugurated for a second term around May 29. So he was inaugurated towards the beginning of the second half of 2019. So, and when he came on board, we saw some sort of reforms. We saw the Finance Act being worked on, 2020 Finance Act. We saw the Petroleum Sharing Contract Act being passed into law. We also saw for the first time in a very long period, some said even before, since Nigeria gained independence, the budget was passed on time. So we saw those positive effects, and people felt the economy was on a trajectory of growth. But surprisingly, and something struck globally, the coronavirus, which nobody expected, nobody saw it coming. Normally, towards the end of every year, we get reports from institutions. They forecast what will happen the coming year. Fitch, Standard & Poor, even the Renaissance Capital, the local ones in Nigeria, AfriInvest, Financial Derivative, none of them were able to see, they didn't see coming. Thank you. Some actually saw it, but they didn't know that the magnitude of the effect we are feeling today will be this much. So we saw the impact of COVID-19. We saw how the global economy was shut down, demand and supply shock everywhere, disruptions due to the lockdowns in US, China, and back home. We saw what happened since February, when the first case, February 26 precisely, when the first case was recorded. We've seen a gradual increase a steady increase from one case in February to about 139 at the end of March to about 1,900 at the end of April. As of today, we're talking about 45,000 cases. So we've seen the effect. And in response to this, we saw the central bank and the monetary and the fiscal authorities taking some measures. The central bank outlined about 6-point agenda. It's unveiled the 50 billion intervention fund for the household, the 100 billion healthcare intervention fund. We also saw it announcing the 1 trillion intervention fund for the manufacturing sector. And of recently, the federal government has approved the 15 trillion infrastructure company. On the fiscal side, we also saw the federal government revising downward the 2020 budget. We also saw the federal government, which although is still debatable, intervening in form of palliatives. Some have said is not true, but the federal government told us they've intervened. So all these are in response to the COVID-19 to see how they can support livelihoods and households.
And how they can sustain the economy.
Yes.
Now let me quickly take you up here, Chima. You've actually said a lot about the economic indicators.
Yeah.
And the fact is that we can see a sinking ship. You've talked about the inflation rising to 12.5%.
Yes.
And so many indicators as you have mentioned. Now, what do you think the federal government can do from a reportorial point of view to reflate the economy, apart from what the CBN has been doing?
Yeah, a good one. If you see what is happening around the world, nobody has the templates for COVID-19. In the US, Italy, China, all everybody is doing is more of trial and error. And from hindsight, what people are doing is they look back at what happened with the Spanish flu, the Asian flu. When such occurs, when there's a pandemic, what government normally do is to adopt expansionary monetary and fiscal policy to see how they can pump in much more money into the system, which is what we've seen the federal government do in recent time. Although through the central bank, we've seen different forms of intervention funds to see how they can put money in the hands of individuals, because they believe that if you and I have money and we're able to spend and there's this circular flow of income.
There's disposable income.
Thank you. So that is what others have been doing. This is the template we've seen the CBN and the federal government adopt in recent times.
Now, I'm going to come into some companies later, but then let's look at the NPR.
Yeah.
The CBN retains the NPR at 12.5% as at July. Mm-hmm. What is the relevance of this, or what is the implications to Nigeria's economy?
Okay. The NPR, the monetary policy rate, is the rate at which the CBN lends to commercial banks. It is like a ceiling.
Okay.
12.5%. I think in January it was reduced from 13.5% to 12.5%. What it means is that every bank lending rate takes a ceiling from that. They call it the benchmark interest rate. But in recent times, or over the years, the complaint has been the NPR rate has not been effective. Interest rate is still high. But you and I know that there are other factors that determine interest rates in Nigeria. As long as inflation remains around double digits, we'll still have interest rate around double digits. And some will say, every bank is like a community on its own. Because if you go to the branch of any commercial bank today, you see security men. They pay for those policemen. They power their generator. They have their own IT system. Because of these infrastructural deficits, the banks will definitely impute the cost of this into the amount they will borrow to their customers. So these are some other factors that drive interest rates.
And they must also declare billions of naira at the end of the quarter to satisfy their shareholders. Okay. Thank you very much. At this point in time, I'd like to invite our viewers to join in analyzing the Nigerian's economy. We have here in the studio Obinna Chima leading the analysis. You can join by calling into the show by using the number that you see on the screen of your television. Now, Chima, let's talk about what is happening to so many business players. So many companies are finding it very difficult to retain their number of staffs. Therefore, we have pay cuts, in some cases, job loss. We know of a particular one that is staring at us in the face now in the aviation industry. Now, what do you think the federal government can do differently to stop this before it degenerates into something terrible?
You mentioned the aviation sector.
That's just the example that is staring at us in the face now.
Let me start with the aviation sector.
The
clamor, the federal government have said they want to intervene in the sector. They've been the clamor for the federal government to release the much talked about bailout fund to the sector. And for other sectors generally, I believe there's need for intervention, which you've seen from the monetary policy arm. And I also believe that the federal government should adopt more friendlier policies. There should be tax relief for companies. If some of these measures are introduced, I think companies they will be able to breathe and have time, and retain their staff. So if you've listened to the monetary policy authorities, you've seen their communique at the end of every MPC meeting. The idea is that if they push in more intervention funds into firms, the firms will be able to sustain their employers, and by so doing, jobs will be retained, and more and more funds will be put in the hands of Nigerians.
Okay, let me ask you this question. It's a two-in-one question, and I want you to be very blunt. Are we in recession at this moment? One. On the other flip of it is that, do you see, if we are not in recession, do you see Nigeria's economy going into recession before the end of the year?
We are not in recession. The second quarter GDP figures should be out, I think, sometime around August 20. And the only body that is responsible for that is the National Bureau of Statistics. So we are all waiting to see what the figures will look like. But the IMF, the World Bank, the Fitch Ratings, S&P, and even the Ministry of Finance, they believe that the economy will slip into recession. But the CBN governor, who heard him speak on several occasions, believes that with more work, with more efforts, that we may escape recession, and that even if the economy slips into recession, it will be a V-shaped recession. That is, we'll go down and we'll come out of recession within 1 or 2 quarters. But generally, the outlook is that by 2021, the economy should rebound. So most of the reports we've seen that the economy should rebound. By the expectation is that this virus will be contained before the end of this year, and economic activities will pick up once more. So that's just it. So
from your analysis, we should not worry too much about the economy.
I don't think we should worry too much. I don't think.
Okay. Now let's quickly look at the manufacturing sector. They are also having a lot of agitations that things are not going down too well, and they've been calling on federal government for palliatives. What do you think the federal government can do? If they are to give palliative, what do you think the federal government can do?
But there is already palliative from the CBN side.
To the manufacturing sector?
Yes, there's a 1 trillion, I'm aware of 1 trillion intervention fund by the central bank.
Do you think many of the players are also tapping into this? From your reportorial point of view.
You know there's a procedure for getting these loans.
Yes.
If your books are in order and you meet the criteria, the requirements, there's a guideline, list of requirements you must meet for you to access this loan. And if you look at the household intervention fund, the CBN brought out 50 billion. And about 49 billion was assessed by household and even SMEs. And from what I heard recently, they are even trying to see how they can bring out more in that household intervention fund. So I believe if they're able to meet the criteria in the intervention guidelines, they should be able to access the funds.
Okay. This might be the final question and your last word of encouragement. What do you think the federal government can do differently now? You know, we talk about intervention funds, we talk about so many things, but the man on the field is not finding it easy. What encouragement can you give to the man on the field, the business players? What do you think the federal government can do to help the situation?
You know, over the years, we've been doing so many things wrong.
Okay.
I believe this pandemic has exposed the structural deficiencies in our economy. Look at what is happening in NDDC,
Okay.
NSITF. There is need for us to block leakages. If we're able to block these leakages, there will be funds available. You may even not need to go and start looking for funds to borrow. A lot. Also, there are things we've been doing badly. This idea of every month the governors or the Minister of Finance, Commissioner of Finance of States go to Abuja. If the federal government generates 1 billion naira, we share it. Things like that. We just need to stop some bad behavior. The pandemic has exposed the need for us to start investing in critical sectors. You see how the health sector is. It has exposed the shambles in the health sector. So we just need to start taking some serious steps. We know people have said these things over and over and over, but I want to believe that this pandemic calls for us to rethink and start doing things right. There are so many things we are not doing in the right way. We need to rethink how we do things.
Okay, thank you very much. You actually talked about the fact that we need to block leakages.
Yeah.
I want to talk about federal government's borrowing. You mentioned it while you were talking. You know, the budget has been reduced, and to even sustain the budget, much of what we are getting from oil is our expectation has come down.
Yes, seriously.
Therefore, the federal government needs to borrow money to sustain that budget.
Yeah.
What is your opinion about borrowing?
There is nothing wrong with borrowing. The problem is when you borrow, make sure the funds are effectively utilized. When you borrow to fix Lagos-Ibadan road, make sure the funds are not diverted to some other things. When you borrow to fix your power sector, make sure the funds go right into the power sector. See, these are some of the deficiencies I talked about earlier. So there is nothing wrong with borrowing. I don't see any problem with borrowing, but the issue is ensuring that corruption around the funds that were borrowed are eliminated. When you borrow, channel them appropriately to what the funds you borrowed were meant to be.
Okay. Still talking about borrowing, you heard of the latest issue that came up with what we borrowed to fix our railway from China. People are saying that Nigerian sovereignty has been sold out to China. The minister has come up to say that sovereignty is not sold out to China. As a business reporter, what is your opinion on this?
It calls for us to properly interrogate agreements and contracts. If there are issues in any contracts that you know will jeopardize the state of the economy or the country, I think we should try and avoid it, because some of the decisions we are taking today are not for us today, but these decisions are for our children yet unborn. So whatever agreements we are going into, we'll have to thoroughly review the contract terms, and if there are issues we think will not be good for the country, I don't think we should go into them. Although this, the issue it raised up is still a subject of debate. The minister has said his position, while the lawmakers have also stated their position. But I believe we should always look at these things before we go into them.
Okay, terms of contract must be spelled out.
Yeah.
Now, I still have about some few seconds to take you. We've talked about the employers. Some employees are finding it also difficult. We are not even talking about people that are unemployed. We talked about the fact that disposable income has actually gone down. What is your advice to employees out there? And what do you advise those that are unemployed?
To employees?
Employees now. Because employees are of the opinion that, can this job be sustained in the face of pay cuts, in the face of other people losing their jobs? Can this job be sustained? You understand it? And they are part of the people contributing to the economy. What would you advise employees now? And the other aspect is those that are unemployed, that are even looking for jobs. You know, in the face of employees having doubts about the sustenance of their employment, we still have some that are unemployed. So what can you advise?
For the employees, I if you see what we've seen with this pandemic is that there's been a lot of emphasis on innovation and technology. For the employees, for us to remain relevant, because I'm also an employee, we must innovate, we must embrace technology, we must embrace the new order so that we remain relevant, so that even if our employers say they don't need us, we will be useful to ourselves and to the society. And for the unemployed as well, I think we must keep retooling ourselves, capacity building. There are various tools to enhance capacity. We embrace them, embrace the new order, and let's keep hope alive.
Thank you very much, Chima, for coming on the show and for sharing your thoughts. That is the much we can take on analyzing the state of the Nigerian's economy. Chima here has told us that there is need for us to block leakages, there is need for us to be innovative, and there is need for us to embrace technology. I want to thank you very much, Chima, for finding time to come on Nigerian's economy today.
Thank you, Doctor.
Please don't go away. We'll go for a short break. We'll be right back.